It was just 3 days before Christmas in the heart of Boston. The city glowed with lights, laughter, and the sound of carolers. Yet one man sat in silence, feeling nothing but emptiness. Nathaniel Carter was a millionaire CEO, but all the wealth in the world couldn't fill the hole left by losing his grandmother, the last family he had. Then, a tiny voice shattered the cold around him. A little girl with tangled blonde curls, dirt on her cheeks, and a teddy bear missing an eye looked up and asked, "You don't have a family either, mister?" She had no idea who he was, but in that innocent moment, everything began to change. What followed wasn't just a chance encounter. It was the beginning of a story about love, hope, and the family we find when we least expect it. Stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe to The Retold Stories. 3 days before Christmas, the city of Boston shimmered in lights and cheer, but for Nathaniel Carter, none of it mattered. He sat hunched on a weathered bench in a park that should have been alive with joy, yet to him it was nothing but echoes of what he had lost. The air was crisp, the kind that stings your cheeks, and his designer coat offered little comfort against the chill creeping into his bones. In his hand, a phone dangled loosely, unread emails piling up, meetings unattended. Nathaniel, once a man whose days were carved into schedules and decisions worth millions, now stared blankly into the winter air as if it might answer questions he didn't dare speak aloud. It had been a year since his grandmother passed away. Jeanette Carter wasn't simply a guardian. She was his anchor, the one who had taken him in when tragedy stripped him of parents too early. She was laughter in the kitchen, warmth in the winters, stubborn love that filled a boy's world. Now she was gone, and all Nathaniel could feel was the silence she left behind. Wealth didn't ease the emptiness. Success couldn't keep the nights from feeling unbearably long. His life was a skyscraper with no foundation, impressive from the outside, hollow within. The wind swirled around him, lifting dry leaves that skittered across the pavement. Somewhere nearby, a musician strummed a guitar with a melody meant for lovers walking hand in hand. Nathaniel barely noticed. He didn't hear laughter or music anymore. He heard only the weight of his own solitude. And then, from nowhere, a small voice cracked the silence. "You don't have a family either, mister?" The words were gentle, almost playful, yet they cut sharper than the winter air. Nathaniel's phone slipped from his fingers, clattering to the ground. He turned and saw her. A little girl no older than 3, her cheeks streaked with dirt, blonde curls peeking out from under a hat 2 sizes too big. Her coat was frayed, sleeves hiding her hands, and her boots were mismatched and untied. Tucked under her arm was a teddy bear with only one button eye, a toy loved far beyond its years. Nathaniel blinked. For a man accustomed to polished boardrooms and calculated conversations, words deserted him. I'm sorry. What did you say?" he managed. She tilted her head, repeating it without hesitation. "You don't have a family either?" There was no fear in her tone, no hesitation, only curiosity. His throat tightened. "No, not anymore." The little girl nodded knowingly, as if she understood in ways adults never could. "Me and Mommy don't either. Just us and Bear. Today's my birthday. I'm 3. She held up her bear as if to prove the celebration was real. Nathaniel felt something stir inside him, a lump swelling in his throat. She went on with the simplicity of a child who believed in magic despite the cold surrounding her. "Mommy said we'd have pizza and a cupcake tonight. Just one, but with a candle. I get to blow it out." Her eyes sparkled even brighter than the Christmas lights overhead, though her coat was thin and her boots soaked at the edges. She hesitated, then whispered, "The shelter was full again. Mommy was sad, so I thought maybe if someone came to my party, it wouldn't feel so cold." Nathaniel's heart clenched. A stranger's child was inviting him to a birthday party of pizza and one cupcake, and yet it felt like the most important invitation he had ever received. He glanced around, almost expecting a hidden camera, a trick, anything to explain the moment. But people hurried past, faces buried in scarves, blind to the miracle happening in front of him. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Laya," she said proudly. "Laya Brooks." "That's beautiful," he replied, his lips forming a smile for the first time in months. "Mine's Nathaniel." "Well, Mr. Nathaniel," she said with surprising seriousness, "you can come to my party if you don't have plans. It's behind the old pharmacy, where the wall stays warm." Nathaniel hesitated. Meetings, emails, corporate obligations all pressed faintly in the back of his mind. But none of them mattered. Not compared to the sincerity shining in her eyes. For once in his life, the choice wasn't about business, it was about humanity. He rose slowly, brushing snow from his sleeves. "I'd be honored, Laya." Her face lit up as she clapped her tiny hands. "Mommy will be so happy." She reached for his hand without fear, and Nathaniel, after a moment's pause, let her small fingers curl around his. They walked together, her steps light and playful, his heavy with uncertainty. Down narrow streets, past shuttered shops and flickering streetlights, she chatted away to him, to the night sky. Nathaniel listened, really listened. Not to reports or market trends, but to a child's stories about cupcakes, candles, and dreams too big for the cold alleys of Boston. As they turned a corner, she glanced up at him and said, "You looked sad before, but now you don't." Something in Nathaniel cracked open. A breath he hadn't realized he was holding slipped out, leaving in its place a flicker of warmth he thought he had lost forever. At the end of the street, Laya pointed proudly. "That's where we live tonight. Don't worry, the wall is warm." He looked at the alley she described. Bare concrete, cardboard, and a single bulb, casting a faint orange glow. It should have felt like despair, but somehow, standing next to her, it felt like beginning. She skipped ahead, calling for her mother, while Nathaniel lingered at the entrance. The wind bit his face, but something within him was untouchable now. He smiled, quietly, uncertainly, but for the first time in years, genuinely. That night, in the narrow glow of an alley lit by one dim bulb, Nathaniel Carter took his first step into a life he never imagined. Not a business deal, not a strategy, but a birthday party with pizza, one cupcake, and the chance to belong. The morning after Laya's birthday, Nathaniel woke up in his penthouse with a strange ache in his chest. It was not the kind of pain his wealth or status could fix. It was the echo of a little girl's laughter, the sparkle in her eyes when she blew out a candle on a cupcake that leaned to one side. The sterile silence of his home felt harsher than ever. For years, Nathaniel had measured his life in contracts, signed and profits made. But now, all he could think of was a child in a frayed coat and her mother standing protectively in the shadows. By dawn, he was back on the streets, retracing his steps, searching the alleys and corners of Boston. He visited coffee shops, bus stops, even asked strangers if they had seen a young woman with a small child and a teddy bear with one button eye. People shook their heads or turned away. His tailored coat grew heavy with snow, and his shoes collected grime as he walked farther than he had in years. For the first time, his assistant's calls went unanswered. His schedule crumbled, replaced by an atom-age obsession he didn't dare name. On the third day of searching, he found himself standing in front of Clara House Shelter, a red brick building weathered by years, but alive with hope. A line of weary souls stretched around the block, mothers holding toddlers, men with hollow eyes, teens wrapped in oversized jackets. Nathaniel, with his wool coat and polished shoes, looked out of place, yet something compelled him forward. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and laundry soap. Behind a desk stood Clara Jennings, a woman in her 50s with kind but sharp eyes. When Nathaniel described Emily and Laya, Clara's gaze shifted, cautious but not dismissive. After a pause, she gestured down the hall. "Follow me." The common room was filled with voices, children coloring, women folding clothes, volunteers serving bowls of soup, and then, there she was. Laya, sitting cross-legged on the floor, crayon in hand, her teddy bear tucked safely beside her. She looked up and for a moment, her expression was blank. Then, recognition lit her face. She leapt to her feet and barreled into his legs. "Mr. Nathaniel!" He crouched to catch her, his throat tight. "Hey, kiddo, you're okay." Behind her, Emily appeared. She looked thinner than he remembered, her coat worn and her eyes sharp with suspicion. She folded her arms, protective, wary of this man who did not belong in her world. Nathaniel raised his hands slightly, as if to show he meant no harm. "I looked everywhere," he said softly. Emily's expression didn't change easily. She studied him with the guardedness of someone who had been disappointed too many times. We move when we have to, she said flatly. Nothing lasts. But that night, something did last. Nathaniel returned with containers of hot soup, bread still warm, and a bag of cookies for Laya. He handed them over quietly, waiting outside while mother and daughter ate inside. The next night, he came back, again and again. He brought small gifts, not extravagant, but thoughtful. A blanket covered in stars for Laya, a pair of wool socks for Emily, coloring books, hair clips, a thermos of tea. He did not push. He did not ask for gratitude. He just showed up. Other residents noticed. Clara smiled at him more often. Children greeted him, without fear. Even Emily, though cautious, began to soften, in tiny, almost invisible ways. One evening as he handed Emily a thermos, he said, "I'm not here to save anyone. I just want to be here." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. That was the first night she chose to sit beside him instead of across the room. Days turned into weeks. Nathaniel found himself drawn into the rhythms of their life, the hum of the shelter. Laya's endless chatter about unicorns and crayons. Emily's quiet strength, as she balanced exhaustion with tenderness for her daughter. For the first time since his grandmother's death, Nathaniel felt himself breathing again, not just existing, but peace is fragile. One cold evening, headlights cut across the shelter courtyard, and a van pulled up bearing the seal of the Department of Children and Families. A woman stepped out, clipboard in hand, her expression brisk and unreadable. "Emily Brooks?" she called. Emily stiffened instantly, pulling Laya close. Nathaniel stepped forward, his heart hammering as Emily tried to shield her daughter. "We've received a report," the caseworker said. "We need to conduct a wellness check." The words sent a chill deeper than any winter wind. Emily pleaded, her voice trembling. "She's safe. She's loved. Please don't take her." Laya clung to her mother's coat, eyes wide with confusion. Nathaniel placed a steadying hand on Emily's back. "We won't let them take her," he whispered. The caseworker wasn't there to remove the child immediately, but a case was opened. There would be interviews, assessments, paperwork, cold measures of stability that did not see the warmth of bedtime stories or the safety of a mother's arms. Emily sat frozen long after the van drove away, her body shaking as she whispered, "I can't lose her." Nathaniel, who had always fought battles in boardrooms with contracts and lawyers, suddenly faced a war of the heart. This was not about profit or prestige. It was about family. He looked at Emily and Laya and knew he couldn't step back. Not now. Not ever. The following morning, he made his first phone call. Not to his investors, not to his assistant, but to his attorney. He requested guidance on filing for temporary sponsorship of a minor. Yet, when his lawyer offered to represent him in court, Nathaniel refused. "This isn't a deal to negotiate. This is personal," he said. For days, he worked quietly, but relentlessly. He gathered documents, shelter records showing Emily's volunteer work, medical reports proving Laya's good health, testimonies from Clara and other residents who had witnessed Emily's devotion as a mother. He printed photos of Laya smiling, of small birthday moments, of the tiny family that was forming in the most unlikely of places. Every detail was prepared, every piece of evidence carefully placed in a folder that grew thicker by the hour. When Clara saw it, her eyes widened. "You're really doing this," she murmured. Nathaniel nodded. "I am, but I need your help." Emily, exhausted and terrified, tried to protest at first. "You don't have to do this for us," she whispered. But Nathaniel crouched in front of her, his eyes unflinching. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it with you. She's your daughter, and she's become part of my life too. Both of you have." Something in her expression softened then, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. For years she had carried the weight alone, expecting no one to share it. For the first time, she wasn't alone anymore. The day of the custody hearing arrived with a gray sky and steady rain tapping against courthouse windows. The small courtroom was no grand hall of justice. It looked more like a converted classroom, with faded walls and fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Yet to Emily, It felt like the stage where her whole life would be judged. She sat stiffly at the table, her hands wrapped tightly around Laya's tiny fingers until the court assistant gently led the little girl outside with crayons and paper to keep her occupied. Emily's blouse, borrowed from the shelter, was neat but worn, and her posture betrayed both pride and fear. Nathaniel sat beside her, a man who once thrived on corporate negotiations but who now looked more nervous than he ever had in a boardroom. In front of him lay a manila folder, stuffed with documents he had gathered himself, testimonies, medical records, photos, proof of shelter volunteering. It wasn't money or power he was relying on. It was truth. The judge, an older man with glasses perched low on his nose, began the proceedings with a measured voice. "Miss Brooks, the Department of Children and Families has raised concerns regarding stable housing and employment. Would you like to respond?" Emily rose slowly, her voice trembling but determined. "I love my daughter. I may not have much, but she is fed, clean, read to every night. She is happy, she is safe. And she has never once gone to sleep without knowing she is loved," a representative from Child Services interrupted. "But she has also been without permanent housing or consistent income. These are material concerns." Before Emily could falter, Nathaniel cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Your Honor, may I?" The judge nodded, and Nathaniel placed several documents on the table. These are character references from the shelter director, records from the clinic where Emily volunteers, medical forms confirming Laya's health. In addition, I've been covering their meals and temporary housing expenses. I am prepared to be named as a varied place, legal sponsor to meet every requirement of child welfare. The courtroom grew quiet. The CPS representative raised an eyebrow. "And your relationship to the child?" Nathaniel's eyes softened as he glanced toward the door where Laya's laughter faintly echoed from the hallway. Then he turned back to the judge. "I met her in a park on her birthday. She gave me something I didn't know I'd lost. She isn't just a child I'm helping, she is family now. And so is her mother." The judge leaned back, studying them both. Emily's eyes filled with tears, her hand reaching instinctively toward Nathaniel's arm. For the first time in years, she felt the burden of loneliness lift, even if only slightly. After a long silence, the judge spoke. "We will authorize a 6-month protective plan. Miss Brooks retains custody under the supervision of Mr. Carter as sponsor. If stable housing and employment are maintained, full custody shall be reaffirmed." Emily sagged into her seat, tears spilling freely. Nathaniel placed a steady hand on her back and whispered, "We did it." She shook her head gently. "No, we did this together." Outside, Laya came running into their arms, her drawing clutched tightly, a picture of 3 figures under a crooked roof with stars above. Scrawled across the top was one word: us. From that day forward, life began to change. Nathaniel opened the doors of his townhouse, once silent and pristine, to a whirlwind of life. At first, Emily hesitated, standing at the threshold as though stepping into someone else's dream. The polished glass, the clean lines, the expensive furniture, all felt like a world too far from hers. But Laya ran across the hardwood floors with her teddy bear in tow, leaving behind a trail of socks and laughter, and the walls of the house slowly softened. Nathaniel didn't just allow the chaos, he welcomed it. Soon, crayon drawings were taped crookedly on the refrigerator, stuffed animals sat proudly on his leather couch, and mismatched socks peeked from under coffee tables. It no longer felt like a showroom. It felt like home. Emily found work at a small pediatric clinic, thanks to a quiet recommendation from Clara. She insisted on earning it herself, walking into the interview with her head high. When she was hired, the pride on her face rivaled the glow of any holiday lights. Each evening she returned home, exhausted but fulfilled, greeted by Laya's shrieks of joy and the steady presence of Nathaniel waiting with tea or dinner, sometimes burnt, sometimes edible, but always offered with a smile. They built small rituals, weekend trips to the farmer's market, bedtime stories told by flashlight under a blanket fort, and Saturday mornings filled with pancakes, often lopsided, occasionally burnt, but devoured with laughter. But the most profound moment came late one night on the townhouse rooftop. The city stretched beneath them, lights flickering like stars caught on earth. Snowflakes drifted gently, dusting Nathaniel's shoulders as he held a small velvet box. He turned to Emily, his voice unsteady for the first time she had ever heard. "Do you know why I stayed that night in the alley?" he asked. "Because for the first time in years, I felt seen. By your daughter, and then by you." He placed the box in her palm. Inside was a vintage sapphire ring that once belonged to his grandmother. "She told me to give it to the person who makes me whole again. That's you, Emily." Her breath caught, tears sliding down her cheeks. Nathaniel knelt not with grandeur, but with reverence. "I'm not asking you to change who you are. I love who you are. I love Laya. I love what this house feels like with both of you here. I lost my family long ago. But maybe I was just waiting to build one." Emily's voice broke as she whispered, "Yes." When Laya stumbled sleepily onto the terrace moments later, clutching her blanket, Nathaniel lifted her into his arms. "Does this mean we stay together forever?" she asked, eyes wide. Nathaniel pressed a kiss to her forehead. "That's exactly what it means." Weeks later, the townhouse was filled with children for Laya's 4th birthday. Balloons brushed the ceiling, a homemade banner stretched across the wall, and the laughter of children filled every corner. Emily, in her scrubs fresh from work, tied ribbons on tiny party favors. Nathaniel emerged from the kitchen with flour still on his sleeve, grinning sheepishly. When the candles were lit on a 3-tier cake, Laya clasped her hands and whispered, "I wish everyone could have a family like mine." She blew out the flames, and the room erupted in cheers. Emily blinked back tears. Nathaniel squeezed her hand, and for the first time, the future did not feel like something to fear. It felt like something to build together. There are stories that slip quietly into our hearts, reshaping the way we see the world. This was one of them. Nathaniel Carter, a man who once believed his wealth and titles could shield him from pain, discovered that none of it mattered when the silence of loneliness grew too heavy. And Emily Brooks, a young mother fighting every day to protect her daughter, carried scars deeper than most could imagine. Yet through resilience and unconditional love, she gave her child something priceless: hope. At the center of it all was Laya, a little girl with wild blonde curls, a teddy bear missing an eye, and a question simple enough to break open a man's heart. "You don't have a family either, mister?" In that moment, a story began that would transform 3 lives. A park bench on a cold December evening became the doorway to a future no one expected. A child's birthday party with pizza and 1 flickering candle became the spark of a family being born. The journey wasn't easy. There were doubts, hardships, and the looming shadow of a system that measured worth in paperwork rather than love. But Nathaniel and Emily stood together, not as savior and saved, but as partners, as equals, as 2 people choosing to fight for the same dream. They proved that family isn't about perfection, it's about showing up, day after day, even when it's hard. It's about creating warmth in the coldest of places. And when the final wish was made, the wish of a child that everyone could have a family like hers, it wasn't just a birthday prayer. It was a reminder to all of us. A reminder that love, when chosen, has the power to heal. That family can be found in the most unexpected places. That hope can rise even from the coldest alleys of a city. Perhaps you've felt loneliness like Nathaniel, or fought battles like Emily, or carried childlike hope like Laya. Their story whispers to us all, no matter where you've been or what you've lost, you are never beyond the chance to belong again. If this story moved you, if it stirred something inside your heart, I invite you to stay with us. There are more stories waiting. Stories of love, resilience, and hope that remind us what it means to be human. Subscribe to the Retold Stories, and let's continue to walk together through tales that bring light into the darkest corners. Because sometimes, the stories we share don't just change how we see others, they change how we see ourselves.